When we were in real estate days, they talked about when you sat down with someone, I could rattle off all the things that I provided and say, man, I make all these flyers, I do all this marketing and all these ads, and I do all this and all this and this. And if I don't pause to actually find out what it needs, I might never know that they're relocating to the other side of the country and they need a relocation service or something like that. That would be their primary need. And so one of the important things to do is really discover the needs of the person that you have. Don't just rattle off what you think they need. Many of the charities in society today really are about just meeting needs and not really finding out what the needs are that they're trying to be able to meet. In the book, A Toxic Charity, written by Robert Lumpton, he argues that most charities do little to reduce poverty, and in fact, they even encourage dependency. What he was describing is that people evaluate their giving and what they do more on the rewards that they receive. And I'm guilty of that too. I said, I feel better doing that, so I do it because I feel better. I drove by that guy without, today I stopped and I gave him something. I feel better about myself. And yet never pausing to really see to what extent is it beneficial to the person who's receiving it. To what extent is it is it helping them out, or is it considering what their particular needs are? When we do that, what we end up doing is just showing charity. I remember seeing a story. It was a Dateline or something like that. One of those. They're all the same. But in the story, they were interviewing a homeless person in L.A. in the projects over there, and it was a story about a particular person, and I can't remember the details, so it's going to be very generalized, but who would actually come alongside the homeless in the L.A. area, and he worked with the homeless, and he actually, he almost seemed homeless the way that he behaved. And in the interview of this homeless person, they asked the question, what is it about this guy that you like as opposed to all the other organizations who provide food and clothing and all the other things? And the response, the person has said, with all those other people, they just throw money and clothing and food at us and then they go about their lives. This person, he says, actually stops to actually care what I think. He actually shows value to me because he wants to be my friend. And he comes alongside me, he says, and really takes the time to get to know me before he even considers trying to be able to help with whatever I need. Well, what's that guy saying? What the guy's saying is that all the other stuff is charity, just throwing stuff. But this person says, I want to pause to be able to see it through your eyes, to be able to understand what's going on, and then from that be able to become empathetic with the needs that you have. And that's what hospitality does. It becomes empathetic with the people who are struggling and finding out what their needs are. And verse 3, that's what the writer had said. He says, for those who are in prison, he says, you come along as if you were in prison with them. For those mistreated, as if you yourself were suffering. It's important to be able to connect with these people, the strangers that are around us, and understand them and see through their eyes if we want to be able to be hospitable. At the very basic level, then, hospitality focuses on the needs of the person. In other words, it takes the time to find out what they're going through and then try to be able to approach that situation. So as a church, as I said a little bit earlier, we pause to be able to think about, a hospitality team would pause to think about, okay, what's the person who's never been here before walking through the door thinking the minute they walk through the door? Maybe they're thinking, where am I going to put my kids? Maybe they're thinking, I got a little toddler. What's the nursery like? Because do they have they background checks, or what do they do? Do they leave them alone with guys? Maybe they think about, what are these people like? Are they going to look down on me? What's the service like? You just process through that and understand what is going through the mind of that person, and then how can we come alongside them and try to remove those fears before they even begin to exist. So oftentimes you'll see in churches where people will greet them as they walk in the door. Nothing more than saying hi, and already you've taken one of the fears out, that no one will ever talk to me. Or you have signs up, or someone standing there saying, oh, you got a toddler. Hey, here's their nursery. Let me walk you over to it. They just remove all of those fears. They're identifying this stranger and finding out what is their need and creating a safe place for them to be able to feel like they're welcomed and loved. At a deeper level, what happens is hospitality moves into this idea of creating true community. The video kind of touched in that. In other words, what's happening is you begin to ask the question, what can I do to be able to help this person help themselves? Not just give them a handout, but I'd rather come alongside. And is it about retraining them with a skill? What is that I can do to be able to help them? There are organizations out there, they call them ABCD, if you've ever seen the initials, but it's asset-based community development, which is the idea of coming alongside a person or a group and creating a place for them to be able to lift themselves up and giving them value and a sense of empowerment in their life. An example I know of someone down in Merced, for Christmas, they went into a project, they had a set of projects, and they helped form kind of an association, if you will. And in that association, they identified people in their building that had needs, and then they gathered the resources within their building to help get gifts to the people in their building. They didn't just say, okay, someone come in from the outside, plant a tree in the lobby, and take off with a bunch of presents like Santa Claus. No, they empowered everybody in there to create this group where someone could come to be able to say, here, we're struggling. And then as a group, they shared their resources, and it gave them a sense of, we can take care of ourselves. We don't need to be dependent on others. That's where hospitality can take you when you begin to really look at things from a standpoint of through the eyes of the people that you're trying to help and to show love to. And then it moves into this idea of hospitality, expecting God to show up. In verse 2, where it talks about this hospitality, it says, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing so, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. I look at a passage like that, and of course you're thinking, oh man, there's some people that, after this hour, they might just disappear. And, maybe some of you have been angels for a long time and hung out longer and eventually be gone. We think, okay, there's some kind of an amazing thing that will happen. It certainly is probably a reference to, again, Genesis 18 and 19, where the three angels appeared to Abraham and he prepared a meal, and kind of the first example of hospitality, if you will, that took place. But when I look at that passage, there's a couple ways that you can look at this. First of all, it's the idea of showing hospitality as if Jesus himself is showing up. How would we act if Jesus was going to come? If you got a memo out, if Scott sent an email out reminding you about this Sunday service and said, oh, by the way, I got word from the top, Jesus is coming. How would you react? Would you just say, I'm good, Would you, say, you know what, hey, let's hold off on going to the 49er tickets. We're going to church Sunday because who knows what Jesus is going to do. Would you, say, I need to straighten out a few things in my life because, I don't want Jesus to call me out, or whatever, and say, hey, by the way, Mark, what about that? I can tell you this. I'd go through my sermon a few more times because I'd be like, man, I could see him sitting over here just thinking, what? What? I didn't say that. What are you thinking? Feeling like I'm going to get the ultimate criticism from someone. And of course, that's obviously the wrong way to look at it. But the point of that is that part of hospitality, this idea is that we should be treating the way we treat strangers as if we were treating Jesus himself. Colossians 3:21 talks about how that he says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working for the Lord, not for men. When you get up and go to work, you do it as if you're working for God. When you're talking to someone else, you do it as if you're working for God. When you are coming out and saying, okay, here's a stranger that needs to be loved, you were to think as if that stranger is Jesus himself. And how would I treat him? I was really proud about yesterday. For those of you who helped, we talked about it this morning again. It was like, man, there was a ton of people. It was great. First of all, personally, it was just the energy of everybody coming out here, and this is their church, and caring about it. It made me feel so good just to watch that kind of energy going on. And we're just talking about cleaning, the baseboards and doing basic things, but there was something special about that. But even beyond that, as good as that is, to me, it's the idea that we're doing it because this is God's house, and he deserves our best. I don't want God to say my home is pretty well beat up and torn down because nobody has the bother to ever clean it up. That they'll clean up their own house before they'll clean up my house. It sends a huge statement to say, no, this is God's place. It's as if we're doing it for Him. That's part of that message of hospitality to strangers. This idea is a belief that we're doing it as if it's God Himself, it's Christ Himself, or angels Himself. But the other part of that, though, is that it could be the idea that God is wanting to do something through that. Every story in the Bible, when an angel shows up, God's up to something. They're not just on holiday somewhere and say, hey, you know what, I got 2 weeks off. What can I do? You see that in the movies. But that's not what it is. When an angel would show up in Scripture, it was always because God was up to something. And it was important to pay attention in that moment. And so the attitude for us in hospitality is recognizing that when I show kindness to a stranger, when I invite them into my life, when I take the time to be able to get to know what they need, and I lift them up to an extent that they feel loved and appreciated, the belief is God is going to take what has happened there and do something really amazing and special, and I need to do it as if I am anticipating that that's huge. That God is saying, I can take the light that shines in this, and I can just bring warmth into a dark place beyond imagining. And so, to me, it's like, well, if that's true, then I want to give it all the light that I can, because I want to see God do some big stuff. And so the writer is challenging us when he says that, look at, show hospitality to strangers as if they're angels. He's saying, create a space for God to do some big stuff. Believe that God is going to use that in that person's experience, the act of kindness and compassion and love. When people walk in through the door, it's going to make a difference in their life when they feel valued and appreciated. You never know what it's going to do to change their view of things. Hospitality often is the entry point of salvation. Just the act of hospitality is the beginning point. It can turn a person around if you've ever heard the stories. It can go either way. We had almost 2 months ago, a visitor, and they sent me an email on a Monday and said, as a pastor, you might want to know this, but I was at your church. I stood at the Welcome Center, and the whole time I was here, no one came up to me. And so I said, you might want to know that. I know that was not the intent of the church, but you just need to know that's the way I felt. And of course, it certainly affected their view of Heartland Church. It could possibly affect their view of other churches unless something else happens in another place. I shared that with the leaders, and the leader, because we don't have a hospitality team, which I'm going to mention in a minute, but several leaders said, okay, we got to do something about that. And so, part of the reason was there are people who are hospitable. Don't get me wrong. That particular day, Scott was busy. I was meeting with someone, and a lot of the people who are that were all gone, and everybody else was just in their own lives, and no one noticed. And so several leaders had said, look, we got to make sure we pay attention. And so from that point on, in the next several weeks, they were just like, someone was always watching to see if there was a visitor that came in. And a few weeks later, we had the opposite. A person came who had a bad experience with the church and had said to the person who took him that, man, that was incredible. That was not like the church I thought church would be. People were very friendly, very inviting. It was just the total opposite. What was different? The only difference was the act of hospitality. That's the only difference, was this act of hospitality and how it impacted. And who knows what God will do from that point on in a person's life to lead them into other relationships and realize, man, there is something, this coat that I wear and these things that I wear are to try to stay warm and not warm enough, and then to experience that ray of light. I want that. And God uses it to draw them to Himself. Hospitality is a natural response that we have to following Jesus. Some of us have the gift of hospitality, but that doesn't mean the rest of us can say, oh, go to that person because they got the gift of hospitality. We all need to be hospitable to strangers, just the same way as some people have the gift of faith. It doesn't mean the rest of us can live and say, I don't need faith because I don't have the gift. No, we're all called to have faith in our life. Others, just because it's a gift, they just take it to a whole different level. But every one of us is called to be able to do that.